Sign here, Caleb, right where it says you agree you're nothing without me. Evelyn Grant's manicured finger tapped the divorce papers with casual cruelty, her diamond rings catching the fluorescent light of the mediator's office. Across the table, Caleb Brooks, her black husband of 7 years, reached for the pen without a word. To Evelyn, his silence confirmed everything, that he was weak, dependent, a charity case she'd foolishly married. She had no idea that the man she'd spent years diminishing had been building an empire in the shadows, or that her smug assumption of superiority was about to detonate in the most public way possible. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest truths. I invite you to follow my story to the very end, and if it resonates with you, please like and comment with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this journey travels. The mediator's office smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Caleb Brooks sat perfectly still in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, his dark hands folded on the table, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Evelyn Grant radiated impatience, her blonde hair swept into a sleek ponytail, her designer blazer crisp despite the May humidity that made the building's air conditioning struggle. "Can we speed this up?" Evelyn sighed, glancing at her phone for the third time in as many minutes. "I have a conference call at 3. The mediator, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Chen, adjusted her glasses and looked between them. "Mrs. Grant, I understand you're busy, but divorce proceedings require—" "Ms. Grant," Evelyn corrected sharply. "I've already reverted to my maiden name, professionally, I mean. The Brooks name doesn't exactly open doors in venture capital." Patricia's lips thinned slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. "My apologies, Ms. Grant. Now, regarding the division of assets—" "There's nothing to divide," Evelyn interrupted, her voice dripping with a kind of charitable condescension that made Caleb's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Caleb doesn't have assets. He has a job. Barely. I'm not asking for alimony from him, obviously. I just want this finished cleanly so we can both move on." Patricia looked at Caleb. "Mr. Brooks, do you have any objections to the terms as outlined?" Caleb spoke for the first time since they'd sat down, his voice low and measured. "No objections." "Where do I sign?" Evelyn's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "Wow. Didn't expect it to be that easy. I thought you'd at least try to squeeze some support out of me, given—" She waved her hand vaguely in his direction, a gesture that somehow managed to encompass everything she found wanting about him. "I don't need your support, Evelyn," Caleb said quietly, reaching for the pen Patricia offered. "Oh, sweetie." Evelyn's laugh was crystalline and cruel. "You've needed my support for 7 years. That's not going to magically change because you sign a piece of paper." Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could focus on—" "I'm just being honest," Evelyn continued, leaning back in her chair with the relaxed posture of someone who knew they held all the cards. "Caleb's a smart guy, don't get me wrong, very smart with computers and code and all that technical stuff I don't pretend to understand. But smart doesn't pay the bills. Smart doesn't buy a house in Laurelhurst. Smart doesn't keep the lights on when you're too proud to take a real job at a real company." Caleb signed the first page without looking up, his handwriting neat and precise. "I tried to help him network," Evelyn told Patricia, as if Caleb weren't sitting right there. "Introduced him to people who could have changed his career, but he never took the opportunity seriously. Too busy tinkering with his little side projects, convinced he was going to be the next tech genius." "Evelyn." Caleb's voice was soft, but carried a note that made her pause. "Can we just finish this?" "See? Even now, he won't engage. 7 years of this, Patricia? 7 years of trying to pull him up, and he just—" Evelyn made a sinking gesture with her hand. "Some people are comfortable being small, I guess." Patricia's discomfort was palpable. "Mr. Brooks, if you need a moment—" "I don't." Caleb flipped to the next page, signed, flipped again. Evelyn watched him with something that might have been disappointment or might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell with her. "You know what's sad? I actually thought you had potential when we met. You were at that tech conference, remember? Presenting some encryption thing. You seemed so passionate, so driven. I thought, here's a guy who's going somewhere." Caleb's pen paused for just a fraction of a second, then continued. "But passion doesn't translate to success if you don't know how to play the game," Evelyn continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. You have to network. You have to take risks. You have to be willing to leave the safe little bubble of your mediocre salary and actually bet on yourself. I did bet on myself, Caleb said quietly, signing the final page. Evelyn laughed again, that tinkling sound that had once charmed him and now felt like glass shards. Oh? Where? When? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been working the same dead-end developer job for 6 years, living in my house, driving the car I co-signed for, using the connections I provided. That's not betting on yourself, honey. That's betting on me. Caleb slid the signed documents across the table to Patricia, then met Evelyn's eyes for the first time since they'd sat down. We're done here? Patricia gathered the papers quickly, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable session. Yes, I'll file these today. The waiting period in Oregon is— I know the waiting period, Evelyn said, standing and smoothing her skirt. Caleb, I do hope you land on your feet, genuinely. Maybe this will be the wake-up call you need to finally get serious about your career. She picked up her designer purse, the one that cost more than Caleb's monthly salary, as she'd reminded him more than once, and headed for the door. Then she paused, turning back with what looked like genuine concern on her face. Actually, I've been meaning to ask, where are you planning to live? Because the house is mine, obviously. My parents helped with the down payment and the mortgage is in my name. You'll need to be out by the end of the month. I'm aware, Caleb said. Do you have somewhere to go? Because if you need help with first month's rent somewhere, I could— I'm fine, Evelyn. She studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. You know, that's always been your problem. Too proud to accept help, too stubborn to admit when you're in over your head. It's going to be harder out there on your own, Caleb. A lot harder than you think. I'll manage. Will you? She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Because between you and me, the optics aren't great. 34-year-old black man, mid-level developer, fresh off a divorce, no assets, no real prospects. Companies are going to see that resume and make assumptions. Fair or not, that's reality. Caleb stood slowly, gathering the copy of the papers Patricia had prepared for him. He was taller than Evelyn, but she'd always had a way of making him feel smaller. Thanks for the concern. I'm serious. Her voice softened, taking on that particular quality she used when she wanted to seem kind while being cruel. You should think about taking one of those positions I mentioned. My friend Derek is still looking for developers at his firm. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. I could put in a word. I don't need you to put in a word. Pride, Evelyn sighed, shaking her head. That's what's going to sink you. But okay, have it your way. Just don't come crying to me in 6 months when you're drowning in debt and can't find work because you were too stubborn to accept a helping hand. She left then, her heels clicking authoritatively down the hallway, leaving behind the faint scent of her expensive perfume and the weight of her assumptions. Patricia waited until the sound of Evelyn's footsteps faded before speaking. Mr. Brooks, I apologize if that was— You don't need to apologize, Caleb said, his voice still calm, still measured. You did your job. Still, some divorces are more contentious than others, and that was— She trailed off, searching for the right word. That was Evelyn, Caleb finished. He allowed himself a small, tired smile. That's just who she is. The house in Laurelhurst was exactly as Evelyn had described it, hers. The deed bore only her name, the mortgage payments came from her account, and the expensive furniture that filled its rooms reflected her taste entirely. Caleb had occupied it for 7 years, but he'd never truly lived in it. He'd existed there, like a piece of furniture that served a purpose but didn't quite match the decor. He packed methodically over the next 2 weeks, sorting through 7 years of accumulated belongings. Most of it, he realized, wasn't his. The expensive coffee maker, Evelyn's. The leather couch, her parents' housewarming gift, the art on the walls, the dishes in the kitchen, the smart TV in the living room, all carefully selected by Evelyn to reflect the life she wanted to project. What was actually his fit into 4 boxes: clothes, books, his laptop and work equipment, and a few personal items that had survived Evelyn's periodic purges of anything she deemed clutter. Is that really all you're taking? Caleb looked up from the box he was sealing to find Evelyn standing in the doorway of what had been his home office. She'd stopped by to check on the move-out process, though they both knew she really wanted to ensure he wasn't trying to claim anything that wasn't his. "That's all that's mine," he replied simply. She walked into the room, her eyes scanning the nearly empty shelves. "What about the desk?" "I don't want it." "It came with the house." "The chair?" "Same." Evelyn frowned, looking almost disappointed. "Caleb, you've lived here for 7 years. You must have accumulated more than 4 boxes of belongings." "I didn't need much." "Apparently." She perched on the edge of the desk, crossing her legs. "Where are you moving to? You never said." "Does it matter?" "I'm curious, professionally curious, I mean. I work with enough startups and entrepreneurs to know that living situations often reflect financial stability. Or instability." Caleb taped the final box shut. "I'm not one of your investment prospects, Evelyn." "No, but you are someone I spent 7 years with. I'm allowed to be curious." She paused, studying him. "You're not going to be homeless, are you? Because if you need a loan to cover first and last month's rent somewhere, I have a place." "Where?" "Does it matter?" he repeated. Evelyn's expression shifted, a flash of irritation breaking through her veneer of concern. "You know, this is exactly what drove me crazy about you. This wall you put up. This refusal to let anyone in or let anyone help. We were married, Caleb, married, and I never had any idea what was really going on in your head." "Maybe that's because you never asked," Caleb said quietly. "You told, you assumed, you decided who I was and what I needed, but you never actually asked. That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He picked up one of the boxes, testing its weight. "How many times did you ask about my work? My actual work? Not just whether I'd networked with your contacts or applied for the jobs you thought I should want. I asked all the time. You asked if I'd made any real progress. You asked when I was going to stop playing around with side projects. You asked why I wouldn't get serious about my career. But you never asked what I was actually building or why it mattered to me." Evelyn stood, her arms crossed defensively. "Because it didn't matter, Caleb. That's the point. You spent 7 years building things that went nowhere while I was actually advancing my career, actually making money, actually creating a life for us." "A life for you," he corrected. "This was always your life, your house, your friends, your career, your vision. I was just supposed to fit into it." "And you couldn't even do that successfully," Evelyn shot back, her patience finally cracking. "I gave you every opportunity, every connection, every chance to prove you could be more than a mediocre developer grinding away at some boring corporate job, and you wasted it, all of it." Caleb set the box down and looked at her directly. "Did you ever consider that maybe I didn't want your vision of success? That maybe I was working towards something different?" "Like what? Poverty?" "Because that's where your different vision is leading. You make $60,000 a year, Caleb. Do you know what I made last year? $340,000, plus equity, plus bonuses. That's the difference between someone who actually understands how the world works and someone who's too proud to admit they need help." "I never asked you for money, Evelyn. You didn't have to. I paid for this house. I paid for vacations. I paid for the car. I paid for—" She stopped, pressing her fingers to her temples. "You know what? This is pointless. You're leaving, I'm moving on, and in a year, we'll both wonder why we wasted so much time on this marriage." "Probably," Caleb agreed. Something in his easy agreement seemed to deflate her anger. She dropped her hands, looking at him with an expression that was hard to read. "Did you ever even love me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. "I did," Caleb said finally. "For a long time I did. But not anymore. Not for a while now." Evelyn nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd suspected. "When did it stop?" Caleb considered the question, thinking back through the years. "Probably around the time you stopped introducing me as your husband and started introducing me as Caleb who works in tech. Like my only value was my function." "That's not—" She stopped, her expression flickering with something that might have been guilt. "I was trying to help you network." "Oh, you were trying to minimize me," Caleb said without anger, just stating a fact. "Every party, every dinner, every work event. You made sure people knew I was less than you, smaller, lesser, and after a while I realized that's how you actually saw me. I never said that. You didn't have to. It was in every joke you made about my salary, every time you corrected me in front of your colleagues, every time you suggested I was wasting my potential. You needed me to be small, Evelyn, because if I wasn't, what did that say about you? Evelyn's face flushed. How dare you? I'm not trying to hurt you, Caleb said calmly. I'm just answering your question. You asked when I stopped loving you. That's when. When I realized you didn't love me, you loved the idea of being the successful one, the provider, the one who saved the struggling black guy from mediocrity. That's the story you needed to tell yourself. Get out, Evelyn said, her voice tight. I'm trying to. No, I mean now. Hey, take your boxes and get out. I don't want you in my house another second. Caleb picked up 2 of the boxes, balancing them carefully. I'll come back for the rest tomorrow. No, take them all now or I'm throwing them away. He looked at the remaining boxes, then at her flushed, angry face. Okay. It took him 3 trips to load everything into the 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one Evelyn had co-signed for and never let him forget it. On his final trip, she was waiting by the front door, holding a glass of wine, watching him with an expression that seemed to waver between triumph and something else, something sadder. You're making a mistake, she said as he picked up the last box. Leaving with nothing, going to who knows where, starting over at 34 with nothing to show for the last 7 years. You're going to regret this. Caleb paused at the door, the box balanced against his hip. Maybe, but at least I'll regret it on my own terms. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done living in your shadow, Evelyn. I'm done being the supporting character in your success story. Whatever happens next, it's mine. Your pride is going to destroy you, she said, taking a sip of wine. You'll see. In 6 months, a year, you'll see that everything I said was true. And by then, it'll be too late to fix it. Caleb shifted the box, getting a better grip. You know what's interesting? You keep talking about my pride like it's this terrible flaw. But the whole time we were married, your pride was the only thing that mattered. Your reputation, your image, your success. My pride is the problem only because it interferes with your narrative. My narrative? My narrative is based on reality, Caleb. The reality that I'm successful and you're not. That I saw opportunities and took them while you hid behind your computer, convincing yourself that your little projects mattered. That's not narrative. That's fact. We'll see, Caleb said quietly. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. We'll see whose narrative turns out to be true. He walked out then, loading the final box into his car while Evelyn stood in the doorway, backlit by the expensive chandelier she'd spent 3 months selecting. As he pulled away from the Laurelhurst house for the last time, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her still standing there, watching him leave with an expression he couldn't quite read. He didn't look back again. Well, the apartment in Northwest Portland was small, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a renovated building near Forest Park. It had high ceilings, decent light, and cost significantly less than half of what Evelyn paid monthly for the Laurelhurst house. Caleb carried his 4 boxes up the stairs and set them down in the middle of the empty living room. The silence was profound. For the first time in 7 years, he was completely alone, surrounded by space that was entirely his. No expensive furniture that he wasn't allowed to rearrange. No carefully curated art that reflected someone else's taste. No rules about which rooms were for show and which were for living. Just empty space and possibility. His phone buzzed, a text from his sister, Maya. How'd it go? You okay? Caleb smiled slightly and typed back, I'm out, I'm fine. The response came quickly. Want company? I can bring dinner. Tomorrow, tonight, I just want quiet. Okay. Love you, little brother. Love you too. He set the phone down and looked around the apartment. It would need furniture, a bed, at minimum, a desk for work, maybe a couch eventually. But for now, the emptiness felt right. Necessary, even. His laptop was in the box marked work equipment. He pulled it out, along with the charging cable, and set it up on the kitchen counter, the only flat surface available. While it powered on, he unpacked a few more essentials. Clothes in the bedroom closet, toiletries in the bathroom, books stacked along the living room wall. The laptop chimed, signaling it was ready. Caleb opened it, entered his password, and pulled up his email. Among the usual work messages and spam was one from his lawyer, confirming that the divorce papers had been filed and the waiting period had officially begun. 60 days, Caleb murmured to himself. 60 days, and it's final. He closed the email and opened a different folder, one buried several layers deep in his file system. Inside were dozens of documents: incorporation papers, patent applications, licensing agreements, financial statements. 7 years of quiet work, of late nights after Evelyn had gone to bed, of weekends spent tinkering while she rolled her eyes and made plans with friends. 7 years of building something she'd never bothered to understand. He opened the most recent financial statement and studied the numbers. Evelyn had been right about one thing. His salary as a developer was $60,000 a year. Respectable, but not impressive, especially not in comparison to her venture capital income. But that salary had never been his primary income. It had been cover, camouflage. A way to fly under the radar while he built something real. The statement showed revenue from 3 different sources: licensing fees for the encryption technology he'd developed and patented 4 years ago, consulting income from contracts with companies that used his protocols, and equity appreciation in the small tech firm he'd co-founded with 2 former colleagues. Last year's total, $1.2 million. This year was tracking even higher. Caleb closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the tree-lined street below. Somewhere across town, Evelyn was probably celebrating her freedom, maybe calling friends to laugh about how easy the divorce had been, how she'd escaped from dead weight, how she was ready to find someone who actually matched her ambition. Let her celebrate. Let her believe her version of the story. In 60 days, none of it would matter anyway. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. He considered ignoring it, then answered. Caleb Brooks? Speaking. This is Jennifer Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I'm an attorney specializing in intellectual property and contract law. I was referred to you by David Chen. I believe you two worked together at Apex Solutions? David, yeah, what can I do for you? Actually, I'm calling about what I might be able to do for you. David mentioned you're going through a divorce and that there might be some complexity regarding asset disclosure and division. Caleb felt a small smile form. David had been one of his co-founders, one of the few people who knew the full scope of what he'd built. There might be. I'd like to schedule a consultation if you're open to it. I've handled several cases involving entrepreneurs and tech professionals going through divorce, particularly in situations where one party may not fully understand the other's financial position. That's an interesting way to put it, Caleb said. I find diplomacy helps, Jennifer replied, a note of humor in her voice. Are you available tomorrow? I have an opening at 2. I can make that work. Excellent. I'll send you the address. And Mr. Brooks, bring all your documentation, everything. The more complete the picture, the better I can help you. I will. Thank you. After they hung up, Caleb returned to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of sunset Evelyn would have photographed and posted to social media with some caption about new beginnings or embracing change. Caleb just watched it in silence, letting the colors shift and fade, thinking about the conversation ahead, about the documentation sitting on his laptop, about the carefully constructed assumptions that were about to come crashing down. 60 days until the divorce was final, but the real countdown had already begun. And when it ended, Evelyn Grant was going to learn a lesson she'd spent 7 years refusing to understand. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy, and the quietest people often hold the loudest truths. Jennifer Morrison's office occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower in downtown Portland, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Willamette River and the bridges spanning it like elegant stitches holding the city together. Caleb arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that contained printouts of every financial document, patent filing, and corporate structure diagram he'd meticulously organized over the past 3 days. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red hair and a professional smile, offered him coffee while he waited. He accepted, more for something to do with his hands than any real desire for caffeine. The office itself spoke of success. Tasteful modern furniture, original artwork on the walls, the kind of ambient music that was designed to be calming without being noticeable. "Mr. Brooks?" Jennifer Morrison appeared in the doorway of her private office exactly at 2 o'clock. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Please, come in." Her office was smaller than he'd expected, but meticulously organized. 2 walls were lined with law books and case files, while the window wall offered that stunning river view. She gestured to a chair across from her desk and settled into her own seat with the easy confidence of someone who'd occupied it for many years. "Thank you for meeting with me," Caleb said, setting his portfolio on the edge of her desk. "David Chen speaks very highly of you," Jennifer replied, opening a legal pad and uncapping an expensive-looking pen. "He said, and I quote, 'Caleb is the smartest person I know who everyone thinks is average.'" That's quite an endorsement. Caleb allowed himself a small smile. David has a way with words. "He also said your soon-to-be ex-wife has no idea what she's walked away from. Is that accurate?" "Very accurate." Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Before we dive into the details, I need to understand something. Why did you hide your financial success from your wife? Because that's going to be the first question anyone asks, and we need a clear, defensible answer." Caleb had anticipated this question. He'd been asking himself the same thing for months, trying to articulate motivations that felt almost instinctive. "I didn't hide it, exactly. I just didn't volunteer information she never asked for. Evelyn made assumptions about my income based on my salary, and I never corrected her." "Why not?" "Because early in our marriage, I realized something." Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. Evelyn needed to be the successful one, the provider, the one with the vision and the connections. If I told her about my patents, my company, my actual income, it would have disrupted the narrative she needed to maintain about herself, about us. "But that sounds like you were protecting her ego at the expense of an honest marriage," Jennifer observed, her tone neutral but probing. "Maybe. Or maybe I was protecting my work from someone who would have tried to control it, reshape it, use it as a networking tool for her own benefit." Caleb met her eyes steadily. The more successful Evelyn became in venture capital, the more she saw everything, including me, as assets to be leveraged. I didn't want my company to become another line item in her portfolio. Jennifer made a note. "Did you commingle any of your income with marital assets?" "No. Everything I earned from patents and consulting went into separate accounts that were established before we married. The company equity is held in my name alone, formed with capital I'd saved from a previous job. My developer salary went into our joint account, which paid for household expenses. Evelyn's income paid the mortgage, her car, her investment accounts, all in her name only. So essentially, you maintained completely separate finances?" "Completely separate," Caleb confirmed. "I can document every deposit, every transfer, every investment. There's no overlap." Jennifer's expression shifted subtly, a hint of satisfaction crossing her features. "That's going to make things much simpler. Oregon is an equitable distribution state, but separate property acquired before marriage or kept clearly separate during marriage generally remains separate. The challenge will be proving you maintained that separation and didn't use marital time or resources to develop your business." "I developed the initial encryption protocol 3 years before I met Evelyn," Caleb said, opening his portfolio. "The patent was filed 2 years before we married. The company was incorporated 6 months before our wedding. I have time-stamped documentation for all of it." He slid a thick folder across the desk. Jennifer opened it, her eyes scanning the documents with the practiced speed of someone who'd reviewed thousands of similar files. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read. "This encryption technology, it's being licensed by major financial institutions?" 11 of them currently, 3 more contracts pending." "And the consulting work?" "Primarily cybersecurity assessments for Fortune 500 companies. I work under an NDA for most of them, but I can provide sanitized documentation showing income without revealing client identities." Jennifer continued reading, occasionally making notes or asking brief, clarifying questions. The silence stretched for several minutes, broken only by the whisper of turning pages and the distant hum of the city below. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Brooks, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. Is there any part of your financial situation that could be construed as fraudulent concealment of assets? No. You're certain? Because if we go down this road and something surfaces later, I'm certain, Caleb said firmly. I never lied to Evelyn about my income. I filed accurate tax returns every year, listed all my assets properly, paid every penny I owed. I just didn't volunteer information she never asked for. If she'd ever asked to see my tax returns or questioned where my time went, I would have told her the truth. But she never asked. She never asked, Caleb confirmed. She assumed she knew everything worth knowing about my financial situation, and I let her keep assuming. Jennifer closed the folder and tapped it thoughtfully with her pen. The divorce papers you signed, did they include any financial disclosures from you? The mediator asked if I had any assets to declare. I said no. Jennifer's eyes sharpened. You lied? I said I had no marital assets to declare, which was true. Everything I own is separate property. That's a technical distinction that a judge might not appreciate. Which is why I'm here, Caleb said. I want to do this correctly. I want to file a complete financial disclosure before the divorce is finalized, lay everything out in the open, and let the court confirm that my separate property remains separate. Even though that will likely infuriate your wife? Especially because of that. Caleb's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. For 7 years, Evelyn told me I was unsuccessful, unmotivated, a disappointment. She mocked my work in front of her friends, suggested I was too proud to accept her help, implied that I was living off her success. I want the record to reflect the truth. Jennifer studied him for a long moment. This isn't really about the money for you, is it? No. Then what's it about? Caleb thought about Evelyn standing in the doorway of the Laurelhurst house, wine glass in hand, telling him his pride would destroy him. He thought about every dinner party where she'd introduced him as Caleb, who works in tech, with that particular emphasis that made it clear she considered his work unremarkable. He thought about 7 years of being treated as lesser, smaller, a charity case who should be grateful for her support. It's about dignity, he said finally. It's about the record showing that I built something real while she was busy assuming I'd built nothing. It's about making sure that when this is over, nobody gets to claim I walked away with nothing because I had nothing. Jennifer nodded slowly. All right. Then here's what we're going to do. We'll file an amended financial disclosure with the court within the next 2 weeks. We'll document every asset, every income source, every patent and equity stake. We'll prove the separate nature of your property and request the court's confirmation that it remains separate in the divorce settlement. How will Evelyn react when she sees it? Badly, I imagine. She'll probably claim you hid assets, demand her share, argue that your work during the marriage should be considered marital property. Can she make that stick? Not if your documentation is as clean as it appears to be, but she can make it expensive and time-consuming to fight. Are you prepared for that? Caleb thought about his bank account, about the steady stream of licensing fees and consulting income, about the equity in a company that was growing faster than projected. I'm prepared. Good. Because I suspect your wife has access to excellent attorneys through her venture capital connections, and they're not going to let this go quietly. Neither am I, Caleb said. Mess. The amended disclosure took 12 days to prepare. Jennifer and her team worked with Caleb's accountant and corporate lawyer to compile a complete picture of his financial situation, organized in a way that made the separation between his property and marital property absolutely clear. The final document was 73 pages long, backed by another 200 pages of supporting documentation. They filed it on a Tuesday morning. Jennifer called Caleb that afternoon. It's done, she said. The court has the disclosure, and a copy has been sent to your wife's attorney of record. How long before all hell breaks loose? I'd estimate 48 hours. Maybe less if her attorney reads it immediately and calls her right away. It took 36 hours. Caleb was at his new apartment, setting up the desk he'd finally purchased, when his phone erupted with calls. Evelyn's name flashed on the screen 6 times in rapid succession. He let each call go to voicemail, listening to the messages pile up with a strange sense of detachment. The first message was confusion. Caleb, I just got a call from my attorney about some financial disclosure. Call me back, this doesn't make sense. The second was irritation. Seriously, call me back. My lawyer is saying you have patents and a company? What the hell is this? The third was anger. You lied to me. You sat in that mediator's office and lied about having no assets. That's fraud, Caleb. That's actual fraud. The fourth was accusation. I can't believe you hid this from me for 7 years. 7 years. We were married and you hid millions of dollars? What kind of person does that? The fifth was threat. My attorney says we can challenge this. We can prove you used marital time and resources to build your company. You're not getting away with this. The sixth was desperation. Please call me. We need to talk about this. There has to be an explanation. Just call me. He didn't call her. Instead, he called Jennifer. She knows. I gathered. I've received 3 calls from her attorney already. They're threatening to challenge the disclosure, claim fraudulent concealment, demand a full audit of your finances for the past 7 years. Let them. Caleb, an audit will be expensive and invasive. They'll dig into everything. Let them dig, Caleb said calmly. I have nothing to hide. Every dollar is documented. Every transaction is legitimate. Let them waste their time and her money trying to find something that isn't there. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. You've thought about this. You knew exactly how she'd react. I've had 7 years to think about it. All right. I'll respond to her attorney, make it clear we welcome their scrutiny and are confident in the legitimacy of your separate property claims. But Caleb, be prepared. This is going to get ugly. It was always going to get ugly, Caleb replied. At least now it's ugly with the truth on my side. Evelyn showed up at his apartment that evening. He heard her knock, sharp, insistent raps that echoed through the small space, and considered not answering. But avoiding her would only delay the inevitable. Better to face it now, on his terms, in his space. He opened the door to find her looking nothing like the composed venture capitalist who'd smugly watched him sign divorce papers 3 weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, the kind of casual clothes she normally reserved for home alone, never for public appearances. You lied to me, she said, her voice raw. No, I didn't. You sat in that office and said you had no assets. I said I had no marital assets to declare. That was true. Evelyn pushed past him into the apartment, her eyes scanning the space with something between contempt and disbelief. This is where you're living? This tiny apartment when you're supposedly worth millions? I like it, Caleb said, closing the door. It's mine. She spun to face him. How could you hide this from me? We were married, Caleb. Married. You're supposed to share your life with your spouse, not maintain some secret empire in the shadows. It wasn't secret. You just never asked about it. I shouldn't have to ask. You should have told me. Like you told me about your investment accounts? Caleb asked quietly. Your personal savings? Your stock portfolio? Because I learned about most of those from overhearing your phone calls with your financial advisor, not from you actually sharing information with me. That's different. How? Because I wasn't hiding the existence of my success. You knew I made good money. You knew I had investments. I was transparent about my career. Caleb walked to the kitchen counter and leaned against it, crossing his arms. You were transparent about what you wanted me to know, just like I was. The difference is, you assumed you knew everything worth knowing about me, and I never made that assumption about you. Evelyn's face flushed. Stop trying to make this sound reasonable. You committed fraud. You hid assets in a divorce proceeding. I disclosed my separate property before the divorce was finalized, exactly as Oregon law requires. There's no fraud. You signed those papers saying you had nothing. I signed papers agreeing to a settlement that assumed we had no marital assets to divide. We don't. Everything I owned before we married or kept completely separate during our marriage. Everything you own, same thing. That settlement is still accurate. My attorney says we can challenge this. We can prove you used marital time to build your business. Your attorney is welcome to try, Caleb said. I worked on my company and patents during my own time, using equipment I purchased with my own money, developing technology I created before I ever met you. There's no basis for a marital property claim. Evelyn stared at him, her chest heaving. I don't even know who you are. The person I married would never have done something like this. The person you married tried to tell you about his work, multiple times. You weren't interested. You had your narrative, struggling developer, needs my help, lucky to have me, and anything that contradicted that narrative got dismissed or ignored. That's not true, isn't it? Caleb's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath now. Do you remember the dinner party at the Hendersons about 2 years ago? Your colleague Marcus was talking about encryption challenges in financial technology. I tried to contribute to the conversation, mentioned some of the work I'd been doing. You literally laughed and said, "Caleb's not working on anything like that. He does basic corporate IT stuff." Evelyn's face went pale. I don't remember that. I do, because that was the night I stopped trying to share my work with you. That was the night I realized you needed me to be unsuccessful more than you needed our marriage, to be honest. That's a horrible thing to say. It's a true thing to say. Caleb straightened, uncrossing his arms. You built your entire identity around being the successful one in our relationship, the provider, the one with the vision and the connections. If I'd told you the truth about my income, my patents, my company, what would that have meant for how you saw yourself? It would have meant we were partners, Evelyn's voice cracked. It would have meant we were building something together instead of living separate lives under the same roof. Would it? Or would it have meant you'd try to control my work the way you tried to control everything else? Push me to sell my company to one of your venture capital contacts, leverage my technology for your professional network, turn my accomplishment into another asset in your portfolio? Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Her hands were shaking slightly. I've seen how you operate, Evelyn, Caleb continued, his tone gentler now but no less firm. Everything is a transaction. Every relationship is a networking opportunity. Every achievement is something to be optimized, monetized, leveraged. I didn't want that for my work. I didn't want you turning something I built with my own hands into another piece on your professional chessboard. So instead, you turned our entire marriage into a lie, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. Our marriage was a lie long before I stopped sharing my financial information with you. It became a lie the first time you mocked me in front of your friends. The first time you suggested I was wasting my potential. The first time you implied I should be grateful you were willing to support someone like me. Evelyn sank onto the edge of Caleb's newly purchased couch, her face in her hands. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Caleb watched her, feeling an unexpected surge of something that might have been pity. For all her success, all her confidence, all her careful cultivation of image and status, Evelyn looked genuinely shattered. And part of him, a small, diminishing part, felt sorry for that. But a larger part remembered 7 years of subtle diminishment, 7 years of being treated as less than, 7 years of watching her introduce him to colleagues with that particular inflection that made it clear he was an afterthought, a footnote, a minor character in the grand story of her success. What happens now? Evelyn asked, her voice muffled by her hands. The divorce proceeds as planned. The court confirms that our separate properties remain separate. We both move on with our lives. Just like that? Just like that. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. How much are you actually worth, Caleb? Does it matter? I need to know. I need to understand what I... She stopped, seeming to catch herself. I need to know. Caleb considered refusing to answer, but decided transparency might actually speed up the process. Liquid assets, around $3 million. Company equity, depending on valuation, anywhere from $8 to $12 million. Annual income from licensing and consulting, between $1 and $2 million, depending on the year. Evelyn's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, grief, before settling into something harder to read. Jesus Christ. It's all documented, all legal, all separate property. You could have told me, she said, her voice breaking. At any point in our marriage, you could have told me. I could have, but you could have asked. You could have shown genuine interest in my work instead of dismissing it as a hobby. You could have seen me as a partner instead of a project. We both made choices, Evelyn. You don't get to claim all the moral high ground just because mine hurt your pride. She stood abruptly, wiping at her eyes. I want a full audit. I want every document, every transaction, every piece of paper that proves you didn't use marital resources to build this empire you've been hiding. Fine. My attorney will cooperate fully. And I want to contest the divorce terms. If you built any of this during our marriage, I'm entitled to half. You're welcome to try, but Oregon law is pretty clear about separate property, and my documentation is ironclad. Evelyn walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. I loved you, in the beginning, before everything got complicated. I know, Caleb said. I loved you too. But not enough to be honest with me. I was honest with you about everything that mattered. You just weren't paying attention. She flinched as if he'd struck her, then pulled the door open. My attorney will be in touch. I'm sure. She left, the door closing behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam would have been. Caleb stood in the center of his small apartment, listening to the sound of her footsteps receding down the hallway, wondering if he should feel something more than the strange hollowness currently occupying his chest. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Mom said Evelyn knows. You okay? He typed back, I'm fine. It was always going to come out eventually. Want me to come over? Tomorrow. Tonight I just want quiet. Okay. But call if you change your mind. Love you. Love you too. He set the phone down and returned to assembling his desk, finding something meditative in the simple act of following instructions, fitting pieces together, creating order from chaos. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight. The desk stood against the window wall, solid and functional, ready for work. Caleb set up his laptop, opened his email, and found 3 messages from Jennifer Morrison. The first confirmed that Evelyn's attorney had formally requested a complete audit. The second outlined a proposed timeline for responding to discovery requests. The third was more personal. Well done today. I know that conversation couldn't have been easy. You handled it with remarkable grace. Grace. Caleb wasn't sure he'd felt particularly graceful during the confrontation with Evelyn, but he appreciated the sentiment. He typed a brief response thanking Jennifer for her support and confirming he was ready to proceed with whatever came next. Then he opened a different folder, one containing his current project, a security protocol he'd been developing for a consortium of healthcare companies. The work was challenging, engaging, exactly the kind of problem-solving that had drawn him to this field in the first place. He lost himself in code and encryption algorithms, in the pure logic of systems that behaved according to defined rules, in the satisfaction of building something elegant and functional. Hours passed without notice. When he finally looked up, the sky outside his window was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Caleb saved his work, stretched his stiff shoulders, and allowed himself a moment of simple satisfaction. In a few hours, the world would intrude again. Attorneys would make their moves, Evelyn would plot her strategies, the machinery of divorce litigation would grind forward with its inexorable momentum. But for now, in the quiet space between night and morning, Caleb Brooks sat in his own apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his own success, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt free. And that feeling, he knew, was worth more than any amount of money or vindication or satisfaction at proving Evelyn wrong. It was worth the uncomfortable conversations ahead, the legal battles brewing, the inevitable media attention if his story somehow leaked into Portland's tech and venture capital circles. Because for the first time in 7 years, Caleb Brooks was living entirely on his own terms. No one to diminish his achievements, no one to mock his ambitions, no one to suggest he should be grateful for their support. Just a quiet man in a small apartment, building something real while the rest of the world slept. The audit began 3 weeks later on a gray Monday morning that matched the mood in Jennifer Morrison's conference room. Evelyn's legal team had assembled an impressive array of financial experts, forensic accountants, and tax specialists, all tasked with the singular mission of finding some crack in Caleb's meticulously maintained separation of assets. They spread out across the long mahogany table like an invading army claiming new territory, laptops open, documents stacked in precise piles, expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Caleb sat at one end of the table with Jennifer beside him, watching the opposing team organize themselves with the detached interest of someone observing a stage production. Evelyn's lead attorney, Marcus Rothstein, was a silver-haired man in his late 50s who'd built his reputation on aggressive divorce litigation for high-net-worth clients. He'd worn his most expensive suit for the occasion, paired with cufflinks that caught the light every time he gestured, which was often. Let's begin with the basics, Rothstein said, sliding a document across the table toward Caleb. This is your tax return from 7 years ago, the year you married my client. Your reported income was $58,000 from your employment at Apex Solutions, correct? Correct, Caleb replied calmly. And this, Rothstein slid another document, is your tax return from last year. Your reported income was $1.4 million from various sources, including licensing fees, consulting income, and corporate distributions. Also correct? Also correct. So in the span of your marriage, your income increased by approximately 2,400%. Rothstein leaned back, steepling his fingers. And you expect this court to believe that growth had nothing to do with marital time, marital resources, or marital support? Jennifer spoke before Caleb could respond. Mr. Rothstein, if you'd bothered to review the documentation we provided, you'd see that Mr. Brooks's income growth stems from intellectual property developed before the marriage and kept entirely separate throughout it. The timeline is clear and well documented. The timeline, Rothstein said, his tone dripping with condescension, shows a struggling developer who suddenly becomes a multimillionaire during his marriage to a successful venture capitalist. The optics alone suggest— Optics aren't evidence, Jennifer interrupted. An insinuation isn't argument. If you have specific questions about specific transactions or income sources, please ask them. Otherwise, we're wasting everyone's time. Rothstein's jaw tightened, but he maintained his professional veneer. Fine. Let's talk about the encryption technology. According to your filings, you developed this while employed at Apex Solutions. Oregon law is quite clear that inventions developed using an employer's time or resources belong to that employer. How did you obtain clear ownership? Caleb had anticipated this question. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and extracted a document. This is my employment agreement with Apex Solutions. Section 12. Subsection C specifically states that any inventions developed on personal time using personal equipment remain the property of the employee, provided they don't compete directly with the employer's business. Apex specialized in enterprise resource planning software. My encryption protocol was completely outside their business scope. And they just let you walk away with potentially valuable intellectual property? They encouraged it, Caleb said. I disclosed the protocol to them as required by the agreement. They evaluated it, determined it didn't align with their business strategy, and signed a formal waiver of any ownership claims. I have that waiver, notarized and dated 3 months before I met Evelyn. One of Rothstein's associates, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a tablet full of notes, leaned forward. But you continued developing the protocol during your marriage. You filed 2 additional patents after marrying Ms. Grant. Those developments occurred during marital time. They occurred during my personal time, Caleb corrected. Evenings, weekends, vacation days, never during work hours, never using equipment purchased with marital funds. I can provide detailed logs of my development work, time-stamped and backed up on servers that track access. Logs can be falsified, the associate said. Not these ones, Jennifer interjected. The backup servers are managed by a third-party enterprise service with cryptographic verification of all timestamps. Unless you're suggesting Mr. Brooks somehow hacked into a Fortune 500 company's security infrastructure to falsify records retroactively, the logs are ironclad. Rothstein shifted tactics. Let's talk about your company, TechShield Solutions. You claim it was incorporated before your marriage, but it only began generating significant revenue 3 years ago. What changed? The market matured, Caleb said. Financial institutions became more aware of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Around the same time, several high-profile breaches occurred. Companies that had been dismissive of advanced encryption protocols suddenly became very interested. My technology was positioned perfectly to meet that demand. Convenient timing. Market timing, which is luck, not marital property. Rothstein's expression suggested he disagreed, but he moved on. Your co-founders at TechShield, David Chen and Rebecca Walsh, were they colleagues from Apex Solutions? David was. Rebecca I met through a professional networking group for cybersecurity specialists. And when did you form this partnership? 6 months before I married Evelyn. The incorporation documents are dated and filed with the state. There's no ambiguity about the timeline. But the company only had $3,000 in initial capital. Where did the funding for growth come from? Caleb pulled out another document. Detailed financial statements showing every capital contribution, every investor, every source of funding. Not a single dollar came from marital accounts or resources. We bootstrapped initially, then took on angel investors in year 2. I can provide contact information for every investor if you'd like to verify. The associate was typing furiously on her tablet. Some of these investors are connected to venture capital firms Ms. Grant has worked with. Isn't it possible she facilitated those introductions? No, Caleb said flatly. I met those investors through David and Rebecca's networks, not through Evelyn. In fact, I specifically avoided approaching anyone in Evelyn's professional circle to maintain the separation between my business and our marriage. Rothstein's eyes narrowed. Why would you do that if you had nothing to hide? Because I knew Evelyn, Caleb said quietly. I knew that if she became involved in my company, even peripherally, she'd want to control it, shape it, use it as a networking tool. I wanted TechShield to succeed or fail on its own merits, not as an extension of my wife's venture capital connections. That's a convenient excuse for financial secrecy. It's not secrecy if the information was always available. I filed accurate tax returns. I maintained proper corporate records. I followed every legal requirement for disclosure and reporting. The only person I didn't voluntarily share details with was Evelyn, because she never asked, and I had no legal obligation to volunteer. The morning stretched into afternoon, question after question, document after document. Rothstein and his team probed every corner of Caleb's financial life, searching for evidence of commingling, marital contribution, or improper concealment. They examined bank statements dating back a decade, analyzed corporate expense reports, scrutinized licensing agreements, and cross-referenced tax filings against business transactions. Through it all, Caleb remained calm, answering each question with detailed precision, producing documentation for every claim, maintaining the careful boundaries he'd established years ago when he first realized his marriage was built on fundamentally different understandings of partnership and transparency. Jennifer called for a break around 2 o'clock, citing the need for lunch and some relief from the fluorescent-lit conference room. Rothstein reluctantly agreed, and the attorneys dispersed to opposite corners of the building, maintaining the physical distance that mirrored their legal positions. In Jennifer's private office, Caleb accepted a sandwich from the assistant who'd been ordered to fetch food and allowed himself a moment to lean back in his chair and close his eyes. "You're doing well," Jennifer said, unwrapping her own sandwich. "Better than well, actually. You're unflappable." "I've had years to prepare for this," Caleb replied without opening his eyes. "Every document they've asked for, I knew they'd ask for. Every question they've raised, I anticipated." Rothstein's frustrated. He came in expecting to find smoking guns, and instead he's finding meticulous records of legitimate business operations. Will that be enough? Unless they can prove you used marital time or resources to develop your business, yes. And so far, they haven't come close. Jennifer took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. The problem is, Rothstein's ego won't let him walk away empty-handed. He'll keep digging, keep pushing, hoping you'll slip up or contradict yourself or reveal something you haven't disclosed. "Let him dig," Caleb said, finally opening his eyes. "There's nothing to find." "What about your wife? Have you heard from her since the audit started?" "Not directly, though I've received several texts from mutual acquaintances asking if the rumors are true." "What rumors?" "That I'm secretly rich and hid it from Evelyn throughout our marriage. That I'm some kind of con artist who married her for her connections while building a shadow empire. That she's the real victim here." Jennifer's expression darkened. "She's controlling the narrative." "Of course she is. That's what Evelyn does. She's probably already positioned herself as the successful woman who was deceived by her calculating husband, who trusted the wrong person, who's now fighting for justice. Her venture capital colleagues will eat it up. It confirms their existing biases about marriage and money, and who deserves what. Does it bother you, the way she's spinning this?" Caleb considered the question while finishing his sandwich. "A month ago, it would have. Now? I'm just tired of caring what Evelyn thinks or says or does. The truth will come out in court documents that are public record. People who want to believe her version will believe it regardless of evidence. People who actually look at the facts will see reality. I can't control which group someone falls into. They returned to the conference room to find Rothstein's team looking somewhat less confident than they had that morning. The afternoon session focused on technical questions about the encryption protocol itself, attempting to establish that Evelyn had somehow contributed to its development through conversation, feedback, or moral support that warranted financial compensation. "Did you ever discuss your work with your wife?" Rothstein asked. "Early in our marriage, occasionally," Caleb admitted. "She had no interest in the technical details, but I'd sometimes mention challenges I was working through." "And did she provide feedback? Suggestions?" "She'd usually suggest I was wasting my time and should focus on my day job." The associate frowned. "That's not constructive input." "No," Caleb agreed, "which is why I stopped discussing my work with her after the first year or so. But during that first year, she might have contributed ideas that influenced your development process." Caleb met the associate's eyes directly. "Evelyn's expertise is in venture capital, evaluating business models, assessing market potential, connecting entrepreneurs with funding sources. She has no background in encryption, cybersecurity, or software development. The idea that she somehow contributed meaningful technical input to a cryptographic protocol is absurd." "Meaningful emotional support during development could still constitute a marital contribution," Rothstein insisted. "Then every spouse who encourages their partner would be entitled to half their earnings," Jennifer said sharply. "That's not how marital property law works, and you know it." Rothstein's face reddened slightly, but he pressed on. "What about networking opportunities? Did Ms. Grant introduce you to potential clients or investors?" "She introduced me to her professional contacts at social events," Caleb acknowledged. "But I never pursued business relationships with those contacts specifically because I wanted to avoid any claim that my success was built on her network." "That seems paranoid. That seems prescient," Caleb corrected. "Given that we're now sitting here with you trying to prove exactly that claim." The associate tried another angle. "Your company experienced its major growth spurt 3 years ago. What was happening in your personal life at that time?" Caleb paused, considering whether to answer honestly. Jennifer gave him a slight nod, encouraging transparency. "That was around the time I realized my marriage was failing. I threw myself into work as a distraction." "So your marital problems actually fueled your professional success." "My need to create something meaningful in my life when my marriage no longer provided meaning fueled my professional success," Caleb said quietly. "There's a difference." Rothstein leaned forward. "And Ms. Grant maintained the household during this period? Provided financial stability while you pursued your passion projects?" "Evelyn paid the mortgage on a house she owned. She made car payments on a vehicle titled in her name. She managed her investment accounts and her career. I paid for groceries, utilities, and household expenses from my developer salary. We maintained parallel financial lives with minimal overlap." "That's an unusual arrangement for a married couple." "It was Evelyn's preferred arrangement," Caleb said. "She wanted clear boundaries around what was hers. I respected those boundaries and maintained equivalent boundaries around what was mine." The afternoon wore into evening, the questions becoming more repetitive and increasingly desperate as Rothstein's team failed to find the ammunition they'd clearly expected to uncover. By 6 o'clock, even Rothstein seemed to recognize they were fighting a losing battle. "We'll need copies of all the documentation referenced today," he said, gathering his materials with barely concealed frustration. "And we reserve the right to request additional records as our analysis continues." "Of course," Jennifer replied smoothly. "We'll provide copies within 48 hours. "Anything else?" Rothstein exchanged glances with his team, some silent communication passing between them. "We'd like to depose Mr. Brooks's business partners, David Chen and Rebecca Walsh." "For what purpose?" Jennifer asked. "Their testimony regarding the company's founding and operations is already documented in sworn affidavits we provided. We'd like to ask our own questions." "I'm sure you would. But unless you can articulate a specific reason why their affidavits are insufficient, I'm going to object to the unnecessary expense and time commitment of additional depositions." "The court will decide what's necessary," Rothstein said stiffly. "Indeed it will," Jennifer agreed. "File your motion. We'll respond appropriately." After Rothstein and his team departed, Jennifer turned to Caleb with an expression of carefully controlled satisfaction. "That went well." They found nothing. They found nothing because there's nothing to find. But that won't stop them from trying to create doubt, raise questions about your credibility, suggest that somehow the numbers don't tell the full story. What happens next? They'll file motions requesting the depositions, probably also a motion for additional discovery. We'll oppose, the judge will rule, and most likely they'll get some of what they ask for, but not everything. This process could drag on for months. Caleb felt a wave of weariness wash over him. Months of this. Months of them picking apart every decision I made, every dollar I earned, looking for something to justify Evelyn's narrative that I somehow cheated her. "Welcome to high-stakes divorce litigation," Jennifer said, not unkindly. "But Caleb, they're losing. Every question they asked today you had an answer for. Every document they requested, you produced. Every theory they floated, you demolished with facts. Rothstein knows it. His team knows it. Eventually, Evelyn will have to know it too." And then what? She accepts reality and we finalize the divorce on the original terms? Probably not that simple. My guess is they'll try to negotiate some kind of settlement, not because they have a legitimate claim, but because continuing to fight will be expensive and embarrassing for her. She'll want something she can point to and say, "See, I got something out of this," even if it's far less than what she initially demanded. "I'm not giving her anything she's not entitled to," Caleb said firmly, "even if it means more months of litigation, more attorney fees, more public exposure of your private financial matters." Even then, this isn't about the money, Jennifer. It's about the principle. For 7 years, Evelyn treated me like I was nothing, like I'd accomplished nothing, like I should be grateful for her support and tolerance. I'm not going to pay her off now just to make her feel better about being wrong. Jennifer studied him for a long moment. "All right, then we fight. But be prepared. It's going to get worse before it gets better." She had no idea how right she was. The first salvo came 2 days later in the form of an email that landed in Caleb's inbox at 7 in the morning. The subject line read, "Following up," and the sender was someone named Christina Park, a reporter for Portland Business Journal. The message was brief and professionally worded, requesting an interview about his recent disclosure of substantial assets in divorce proceedings, and noting that several sources in the local venture capital community had suggested his story would be of interest to readers. Caleb forwarded the email to Jennifer without responding. Her reply came within minutes. "Don't engage. Refer all media inquiries to me. This is Evelyn controlling the narrative." The second email arrived an hour later, this time from a blogger who covered tech industry news. The third came before lunch from a freelance journalist who'd apparently heard rumors about a local developer who'd hidden millions from his wife. By the end of the day, Caleb had received 7 media inquiries, each one varying in tone from professionally curious to borderline accusatory. "She's launched a PR campaign," Jennifer explained over the phone that evening. "She's positioning herself as the victim and you as the villain. It's a classic strategy. Get ahead of the narrative before the facts come out." "What do I do?" "Nothing. We issue a brief statement through my office confirming that you've made all required financial disclosures, that your assets are clearly separate property under Oregon law, and that you look forward to resolving the matter appropriately in court. Beyond that, we don't engage." While she tells everyone I'm a con artist who deceived her? While she tells her version and we let the legal process reveal the truth. Caleb, I know it's frustrating, but getting into a public war of words will only make things worse. Your documentation speaks for itself. When this goes before a judge, that's what will matter. Not public opinion, not social media speculation, not what her venture capital friends think about you. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. Over the next week, Caleb watched his name and story spread through Portland's interconnected tech and business communities like ink diffusing through water. He saw references to himself on LinkedIn, oblique mentions in venture capital newsletters, even a brief item in a tech industry gossip column that referred to a local divorce case involving hidden assets and allegations of deception. He deleted his social media apps and stopped reading the Portland Business Journal. He declined calls from former colleagues who were suddenly interested in catching up. He ignored the curious looks from neighbors who'd apparently heard something about the quiet guy in 3B being involved in some kind of scandal. And through it all, he kept working. He refined his security protocols, consulted with clients, attended virtual meetings with David and Rebecca about TechShield's expansion plans. The work grounded him, reminded him why he'd built his company in the first place. Not for money or recognition or to prove anything to Evelyn, but because he was good at it and it mattered, and it gave him a sense of purpose that his marriage never had. 3 weeks after the audit, Maya showed up at his apartment with Thai food and a determined expression that suggested she wasn't leaving until they talked about everything he'd been avoiding discussing. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, pushing past him into the apartment and setting the food on his kitchen counter. "Thanks. You look great too." "I'm serious, Caleb. When's the last time you slept? Really slept, not just passed out at your desk at 3 in the morning?" "I sleep fine." "You look like you haven't slept in weeks. You've lost weight, and Mom said when she called last night you barely spoke to her." Caleb sighed, accepting the container of pad thai Maya thrust at him. "I'm fine, Maya. Just busy with the divorce stuff and work and avoiding dealing with the fact that your ex-wife is trashing your reputation all over town while you sit here pretending it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Bullshit." Maya jabbed her fork in his direction. "It matters. Maybe not legally, but it matters. You've worked for years building your company, your reputation, your career. And now Evelyn's telling everyone who'll listen that you're some kind of calculating liar who hid millions from her. That matters. What do you want me to do? Go on the local news and defend myself? Issue some dramatic press release? Get into a public fight with my ex-wife? I want you to acknowledge that this is affecting you instead of bottling it up and pretending you're above it all." Caleb set down his food, suddenly not hungry. "Fine. You want honesty? It's killing me. Every time I see another article or hear another rumor or get another pitying look from someone who thinks they know the story, it kills me a little bit. Because no matter what the truth is, no matter what the documentation shows, there are people who will always believe Evelyn's version, the successful woman betrayed by the scheming husband. It fits their biases too perfectly to question. So fight back. How? By doing exactly what she's doing, turning our private failure into public entertainment, making our divorce into a spectacle?" Maya was quiet for a moment, eating her curry while she considered. "You've always been like this, you know. Always so controlled, so measured, never willing to make a scene or cause a fuss. Sometimes I wonder if that's why Evelyn felt safe treating you the way she did, because she knew you'd never publicly call her on it." The observation hit harder than Maya probably intended. "You think I enabled her? I think you're conflict-averse to a fault. I think you spent 7 years accepting behavior you should have confronted because confrontation felt messier than silence. And now you're doing the same thing, accepting that she gets to control the narrative because fighting back feels beneath you." "It's not that it feels beneath me," Caleb said quietly. "It's that I don't want to become the kind of person who weaponizes personal pain. Evelyn's lying about me. Fine. Let her lie. The truth will come out in court, and people who matter will see the documentation. Everyone else? Their opinion doesn't actually affect my life." "Except it does. You've stopped going to industry events. You declined that speaking invitation at the cybersecurity conference. You're isolating yourself because you don't want to face people who might believe her version." Caleb couldn't deny it. He'd been withdrawing, creating distance between himself and the professional community he'd spent years building relationships within. Not because of shame, he had nothing to be ashamed of, but because he was tired. Tired of explaining, tired of defending, tired of watching people's expressions shift when they connected his name to the rumors. "What would you do?" he asked Maya. She met his eyes directly. "I'd tell the truth, not in a press release or an interview, but in the places that matter. I'd reach out to the people in your professional network who actually know you, who've worked with you, who understand your integrity. I'd let them know your side, not defensively, just factually, and I'd trust that truth builds its own momentum." You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You have documentation, witnesses, evidence of years of legitimate business operations. You have David and Rebecca who can attest to how TechShield was built. You have clients who can speak to your professionalism and capability. Let those people speak for you instead of hiding behind legal strategy and wounded pride. Caleb picked at his pad thai, thinking about what Maya was suggesting. It went against every instinct he had, the instinct to keep his head down, maintain privacy, let the legal process handle everything. But she wasn't wrong about the cost of that approach. He was isolating himself, withdrawing from the professional community he valued, letting Evelyn's narrative fill the silence his restraint created. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Don't think too long," Maya warned. "The longer you wait, the more her version becomes the accepted truth. Not because it's accurate, but because it's the only version people are hearing." They finished their meal talking about other things: Maya's work, their mother's health, plans for the upcoming holidays. But Maya's words stayed with Caleb long after she left, circling through his mind as he tried and failed to sleep that night. Maybe she was right. Maybe silence wasn't strength in this situation. Maybe it was just another form of letting Evelyn win. The question was whether he was ready to fight back, and what form that fight should take. The decision crystallized 3 days later during a video call with a potential client, a healthcare technology firm looking to upgrade their data encryption systems. The executive on the other end of the call, a woman named Sandra Chen, spent the first 10 minutes of their scheduled meeting dancing around the real reason she'd reached out. "I've heard excellent things about your encryption protocols," Sandra said, her eyes not quite meeting the camera. "Several colleagues recommended TechShield specifically, but I have to be honest with you, Mr. Brooks. There are some concerns among our board about recent publicity." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of concerns?" "Look, I don't want to be indelicate, but there are questions about your character, your integrity. One of our board members is connected to the venture capital community here in Portland, and she's heard some troubling things about your divorce situation. Hidden assets, deception, that sort of thing. And based on secondhand gossip, your board is questioning whether I can be trusted with your data security?" Sandra's discomfort was palpable, even through the screen. It's not just gossip when it's coming from respected professionals in the business community. Your ex-wife has a strong reputation. If she's saying these things about you, people are inclined to believe there's truth to them. Did these respected professionals mention that every allegation has been thoroughly investigated by opposing counsel and found to be baseless? That I've provided complete documentation of separate property maintained throughout my marriage? That the audit turned up exactly zero evidence of wrongdoing? "I'm not privy to the details of your legal situation," Sandra said carefully. "I'm just telling you what the perception is. And perception matters in business relationships, especially when we're talking about trusting someone with sensitive data." Caleb took a slow breath, fighting down the anger rising in his chest. "Ms. Chen, I've been developing encryption technology for 8 years. I have 11 major financial institutions currently licensing my protocols. I've never had a security breach, never had a client complaint, never had a single incident that would call my professional integrity into question. But you're willing to dismiss all of that because my ex-wife is spreading lies to save her own reputation? It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You're choosing to believe gossip over documented professional history, which tells me that even if I provided you with the best encryption system available, our business relationship would be poisoned by doubt that has nothing to do with my actual work or capabilities." Sandra's expression shifted, something like guilt flickering across her features. "Mr. Brooks, I understand you're frustrated." "I'm not frustrated," Caleb said, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "I'm done. Done with people making assumptions based on incomplete information. Done with having my professional reputation undermined by personal attacks. Done being silent while lies become accepted truth." He paused, meeting Sandra's eyes through the camera. "I'm going to send you a file. It contains documentation of my business history, client testimonials, security certifications, and a detailed timeline showing exactly how my company was built. If your board reviews that information and still decides my character is questionable, that's their prerogative. But they'll be making that decision based on facts, not gossip. I appreciate that, but I'm not finished. That file will also include a statement that I'm providing to all current and prospective clients, outlining the divorce situation factually and transparently. Because I'm realizing that silence isn't protecting my reputation, it's allowing other people to define it. So from now on, anyone who wants to question my integrity will have to do it while looking at the actual evidence." He ended the call before Sandra could respond, then sat staring at his blank screen, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and something that felt oddly like relief. Maya had been right. Staying silent wasn't noble. It was just another way of letting Evelyn control the narrative. He called Jennifer immediately. I want to issue a statement, he said without preamble. Not to the media, but to my professional network. Clients, colleagues, industry contacts. Something factual and transparent that lays out the truth. There was a pause on the other end. What prompted this? I just lost a potential client because the board had concerns about my character based on rumors from Evelyn's network. I'm not doing this anymore, Jennifer. I'm not letting lies cost me business relationships I've spent years building. I understand the impulse, but we need to be strategic about this. Anything you put in writing can be used against you in court. Then help me write something that's both truthful and legally sound, because I'm doing this with or without your help, and I'd prefer to do it right. Jennifer was quiet for another moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from cautionary to tactical. All right, let's meet tomorrow morning. Bring a draft of what you want to say, and we'll refine it together. But Caleb, once you do this, you can't take it back. You're choosing to make this public in a way that will absolutely escalate tensions with Evelyn. Good, Caleb said. Let them escalate. I'm tired of being the only one trying to keep the peace. He spent that evening drafting and redrafting a statement, trying to find the balance between defending himself and maintaining dignity. The first version was too angry, the second too defensive, the third too technical. By midnight, he had something that felt right, factual, clear, and completely honest about what had happened and why. The next morning, Jennifer read it with her lawyer's eye for potential problems, suggesting small changes in phrasing that strengthened his position while reducing legal vulnerability. By noon, they had a final version that was 2 pages long and contained nothing but verifiable facts. This is good, Jennifer said, setting down her red pen. It's measured, it's supported by evidence, and it doesn't attack Evelyn personally. It just corrects the record. How do you plan to distribute it? Email to my professional network, current clients, past clients, industry colleagues, anyone who might have heard Evelyn's version and deserves to know the truth. You're sure about this? Caleb thought about Sandra Chen's discomfort, about the speaking invitation he'd declined, about 7 years of accepting diminishment because confrontation felt too messy. I'm sure. He sent the email that afternoon, attaching the statement along with selected documentation that supported every claim he made. The subject line was simple: setting the record straight. The body of the email was even simpler. I wanted to share this with you directly, rather than letting you hear secondhand accounts that may not reflect the full picture. Thank you for taking the time to read it. The responses began arriving within the hour. David Chen called first. About damn time. I've been listening to whispers at industry events for weeks, biting my tongue because you asked us to stay quiet. This needed to happen. Rebecca Walsh sent a text. Standing ovation. Want me to share this with my network too? Then came messages from clients, colleagues, even a few competitors who respected what he'd built and were disgusted by the rumors they'd heard. One by one, people who'd been watching from the sidelines suddenly had context, had documentation, had the truth spelled out in a way that made Evelyn's narrative look exactly like what it was. A desperate attempt to avoid admitting she'd been wrong about her husband. Not everyone responded positively. A few people in Evelyn's venture capital circle sent cold, formal emails suggesting Caleb was being vindictive or unprofessional. One person accused him of airing dirty laundry and damaging his own reputation further. But those responses were vastly outnumbered by messages of support from people who'd known him professionally for years and were relieved to finally understand what was really happening. The most surprising response came from Thomas Grant, Evelyn's father, 2 days after Caleb sent the statement. They'd barely spoken since the divorce filing, their relationship having been cordial but never particularly warm during the marriage. The email arrived late in the evening, brief and carefully worded. Caleb, I read your statement. I also made some calls to colleagues who've worked with you professionally. I owe you an apology. Evelyn is my daughter, and I wanted to believe her version of events. But the evidence you've provided paints a very different picture. Whatever happens with the legal proceedings, I wanted you to know that I respect what you've built, and I'm sorry for any assumptions I made. Thomas. Caleb read the email 3 times, feeling something complex and hard to name settle in his chest. Thomas Grant was a formidable figure in Portland business circles, someone whose opinion carried weight. If he was questioning Evelyn's narrative, others would follow. He replied simply, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your integrity. Caleb." The shift in momentum was subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. The Portland Business Journal ran a follow-up piece that was notably more neutral than their initial coverage, citing questions about the accuracy of earlier reports and mentioning Caleb's documentation. The tech blogger who'd initially written a breathless piece about hidden assets posted a correction acknowledging that the situation appears more complex than originally understood. Even the venture capital newsletter that had gleefully reported on the scandal published a brief note suggesting that both parties in the Brooks divorce have very different accounts of the financial arrangements, and the truth likely lies in documentation rather than speculation. Evelyn's response to all of this arrived not through direct contact, but through her attorney. Rothstein filed an emergency motion accusing Caleb of attempting to influence potential witnesses and taint the legal proceedings through extrajudicial publicity. The motion demanded that Caleb be sanctioned for his statement and ordered to cease all public commentary. Jennifer actually laughed when she read it. "He's grasping at straws. Everything in your statement is factual and supported by evidence. You didn't attack Evelyn personally, you didn't reveal confidential information, and you sent it to professional contacts, not media outlets. This motion is going nowhere." "But it shows she's rattled," Caleb observed. "Very rattled. Because for the first time, her version of events is being questioned by people whose opinion she cares about. That's what happens when truth enters a space that's been filled with spin." The hearing on Rothstein's motion took place 3 weeks later in a courtroom that felt too large for what was essentially an administrative matter. Judge Patricia Whitmore, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics, read through the motion with visible impatience while Rothstein argued his case. "Your Honor, Mr. Brooks's statement represents a calculated attempt to influence public opinion and potentially prejudice any jury pool if this matter proceeds to trial. He's essentially trying his case in the court of public opinion rather than through proper legal channels." Judge Whitmore looked up from the documents. "Mr. Rothstein, this is a divorce proceeding, not a criminal trial. There's no jury pool to taint. And from what I can see, Mr. Brooks's statement consists entirely of factual claims supported by documentation that's already part of the court record. What exactly do you want me to sanction him for, telling the truth? He's attempting to harass and intimidate my client. By sending an email to his professional contacts correcting misinformation? That's your definition of harassment?" The judge's skepticism was palpable. "Ms. Morrison, does your client intend to continue making public statements about this case?" Jennifer stood. "No, Your Honor. Mr. Brooks issued a single statement to correct false narratives that were damaging his professional reputation. He has no intention of conducting ongoing public commentary." "And the statement itself, can you verify that everything in it is factually accurate and supported by evidence already submitted to this court?" "Every word, Your Honor. We'd be happy to provide a point-by-point correlation between the statement and the supporting documentation." Judge Whitmore turned back to Rothstein. "Mr. Rothstein, I'm going to deny your motion. Mr. Brooks had every right to defend his professional reputation with factual information, particularly when that reputation was being damaged by, let's be honest here, information your client was actively spreading through her professional network. If Ms. Grant didn't want public discussion of this divorce, she shouldn't have initiated it." Rothstein's face reddened. "Your Honor, with all due respect—" "Motion denied," Judge Whitmore repeated firmly. "Now, are we ready to discuss the actual substantive issues in this case, or do you have more procedural motions to waste the court's time?" The shift in Rothstein's demeanor was immediate and telling. He straightened his papers with hands that weren't quite steady, exchanged a glance with his associate that spoke volumes about their dwindling confidence, and cleared his throat. "We're prepared to discuss settlement possibilities, Your Honor." "Settlement?" Judge Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "I thought your position was that Mr. Brooks had fraudulently concealed marital assets worth millions of dollars. That's quite a shift in strategy." "We believe there may be room for negotiation regarding certain peripheral matters." "Let me save everyone some time," Jennifer interrupted, standing again. "Mr. Brooks has offered to settle this matter on the exact terms outlined in the original divorce filing, a clean separation with each party retaining their separate property. That offer remains open." Your Honor, surely after 7 years of marriage, my client is entitled to some consideration, Rothstein began. Entitled based on what? Judge Whitmore cut him off. You've had ample opportunity to demonstrate that Mr. Brooks's assets were either acquired using marital resources or should be considered marital property for some other reason. Your own audit found no evidence of commingling, no evidence that he used marital time inappropriately, no evidence of anything except a man who very carefully maintained separate finances throughout his marriage. So what exactly is your client entitled to beyond what she brought into the marriage and earned during it? Rothstein seemed to be struggling for a response when the courtroom door opened and Evelyn herself walked in, ignoring the bailiff's surprised expression. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there was a brittleness to her composure that suggested cracks in the perfect facade. Ms. Grant, Judge Whitmore said sharply, this is a settlement conference with attorneys. You shouldn't be— I know, Your Honor, and I apologize, but I need to say something, and I need to say it now. Evelyn's voice was tight with controlled emotion. She turned to face Caleb directly for the first time since the proceedings began. You win, Caleb. Is that what you wanted to hear? You win. You've proven you're smarter than I gave you credit for, more successful, more strategic. You've made me look like a fool in front of my colleagues, my family, my friends. Congratulations. Evelyn, Rothstein started, clearly horrified by his client's outburst. No, let me finish. She kept her eyes locked on Caleb's. I thought I knew you. I thought I understood who you were and what you were capable of. I was wrong. You're not the person I married, or maybe you were always this person, and I just refused to see it. I'm exactly who I always was, Caleb said quietly. You just assumed I was someone else because that fit your narrative better. My narrative? You hid millions of dollars from me. You let me think you were struggling while you were building an empire. I never lied to you about my income. I filed accurate tax returns that you could have seen any time you asked. I maintained separate property exactly as Oregon law allows. The only thing I'm guilty of is not volunteering information you never showed any interest in knowing. Evelyn's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks despite her obvious attempts to hold them back. You should have told me. Regardless of whether I asked, regardless of what the law requires, you should have told me because we were married, because that's what partners do. Partners share their lives, Caleb agreed. But you didn't want a partner, Evelyn. You wanted someone to play a supporting role in your story. The struggling husband you could help and advise and feel superior to. I couldn't be that person and also be honest about my success, so I chose honesty with myself over honesty with you. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's true. Caleb's voice remained level, almost gentle. You needed me to be less successful than you. Your whole identity was built around being the provider, the one with vision, the successful one in the relationship. If I told you about my company, my patents, my income, it would have destroyed that identity. So I protected your ego at the expense of our honesty. And you're right, that was wrong. But don't pretend you would have reacted well to the truth. Evelyn wiped at her eyes, smearing her makeup. You don't know how I would have reacted because you never gave me the chance. I know exactly how you would have reacted because I watched how you reacted to every small success I had. Every time something went well with my work, every time I solved a difficult problem or got positive feedback from a client, you found a way to minimize it. To suggest it wasn't that impressive, that I was getting ahead of myself, that I should stay focused on my real job. You couldn't celebrate my achievements because they threatened your position as the successful one. That's not— Evelyn stopped, her face crumpling. Oh God, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I hate it. The courtroom went completely silent. Even Judge Whitmore seemed stunned by Evelyn's sudden honesty. I did need you to be less successful, Evelyn continued, her voice breaking. I needed to be the one who had it figured out, who knew how the world worked, who was taking care of us. Because if you were successful on your own, what did that say about me? What was my value if I wasn't the one providing stability? Your value was never dependent on being more successful than me, Caleb said. That was something you created in your own mind. I know that now. But 7 years ago when we got married, I was so scared of not being enough, of not mattering, of being the one who needed help instead of giving it. So I constructed this whole narrative where I was the strong one and you were the one who needed me, and I clung to that narrative even when it stopped matching reality. Judge Whitmore cleared her throat. Ms. Grant, I appreciate your honesty, but perhaps this conversation would be better held in private. No, Your Honor, it needs to be said here, on the record. Evelyn turned back to Caleb. I'm dropping the claim for any portion of your assets. You're right that they're separate property. You're right that you maintained clear boundaries. You're right about all of it. My attorney will file the paperwork today. Rothstein looked like he wanted to object, but seemed to recognize the futility. Ms. Grant, if you'd like to take some time to consider, I don't need time. This has gone on long enough. Caleb built something real while I was busy telling myself he was wasting his time. He deserves to keep what he earned, and I deserve to face the consequences of underestimating him. She grabbed a tissue from the box the bailiff awkwardly offered, blotted her eyes, and straightened her shoulders in a visible attempt to regain composure. I'm sorry, Caleb, for not seeing you, for not respecting what you were building, for turning our divorce into a circus because I couldn't accept being wrong. You deserved better from me. Caleb felt a strange mixture of victory and sadness. This was what he'd wanted: acknowledgement, vindication, the truth on record. But seeing Evelyn broken down and crying in a courtroom, finally admitting the dynamics that had poisoned their marriage, didn't feel triumphant. It just felt sad. I accept your apology, he said quietly. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry too. Sorry I wasn't brave enough to confront these issues while we were married. Sorry I chose silence over honesty because confrontation felt too hard. We both contributed to what our marriage became. Judge Whitmore looked between them, her expression softening slightly. It seems you two have reached an understanding. Mr. Rothstein, Ms. Morrison, can we formalize this settlement today? We can, Your Honor, Jennifer confirmed. Rothstein nodded reluctantly, clearly disappointed that his high-profile case was ending not with dramatic litigation, but with his client's capitulation. The actual settlement took less than an hour to finalize. Each party would retain their separate property, divide the minimal marital assets they'd accumulated, and go their separate ways with no ongoing financial obligations to each other. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, it was done. The divorce that had threatened to become an extended legal battle had ended with a whimper instead of a bang. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn caught up with Caleb as he was heading to his car. She'd repaired her makeup and regained most of her composure, though her eyes were still red-rimmed. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Are you happy with how this turned out? Caleb considered the question. I'm relieved. I don't know if that's the same as happy. Relieved that it's over, or relieved that you got to prove me wrong? Both, maybe, but mostly relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore, don't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. Evelyn nodded slowly. I made you feel like you had to shrink. I see that now. I wish I'd seen it sooner. So do I. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people who'd shared 7 years of their lives and were now essentially strangers. For what it's worth, Evelyn said finally, your company, Tech Shield Solutions, it's really impressive. I looked it up after I saw your documentation, the technology you're working on, the clients you have. It's exactly the kind of thing I'd want to invest in if I came across it through my work. Thanks. I mean it. You built something real, something valuable, and I missed it completely because I was too busy seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. She paused. That's going to haunt me for a long time. Then learn from it, Caleb said. Use it to be better in your next relationship. Stop needing to be the most successful person in the room and just be yourself. Easier said than done. Everything worth doing is. Evelyn managed a weak smile. You sound like a fortune cookie. I've been told I have a gift for stating the obvious. The smile strengthened slightly. Take care of yourself, Caleb. I genuinely mean that. You too, Evelyn. She walked away then, her heels clicking on the courthouse steps, and Caleb watched her go with a sense of finality that was both painful and liberating. 7 years of marriage, months of divorce proceedings, and it all came down to this. Two people acknowledging they'd built their relationship on fundamentally incompatible needs and assumptions, then walking away to find whatever came next. He drove home through rush hour traffic, stopped for groceries, and climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment feeling lighter than he had in months. The divorce was essentially over. The truth was on record. His professional reputation was intact, and for the first time since he could remember, his life belonged entirely to him. His phone buzzed as he was putting away groceries. A text from Jennifer. "Congratulations, the final decree should be ready for signatures within a week. You did good, Caleb. Really good." He smiled and typed back, "Thanks for everything. Couldn't have done this without you." Then another text, this one from Maya. "Heard it's over. Proud of you, little brother. Dinner this weekend to celebrate?" "Definitely. My treat." "Your treat? Look at Mr. Millionaire showing off." "Technically, I was always Mr. Millionaire. You just didn't know it." "That joke is never getting old, is it?" "Absolutely not." Caleb finished putting away groceries, made himself dinner, and sat at his desk overlooking the tree-lined street below. His laptop was already open, a half-finished security protocol waiting for his attention. The work called to him the way it always had, that pure satisfaction of solving complex problems, of building systems that protected people and information, of creating something meaningful with nothing but his mind and his effort. This was who he'd always been, not the struggling developer Evelyn had needed him to be, not the charity case who should be grateful for her support, just Caleb Brooks, who was good at what he did and built something real through years of quiet, focused work. And now, finally, everyone knew it. The final decree arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 6 months after Caleb had walked out of the Laurelhurst house with 4 boxes and a decade-old Honda Civic. Jennifer's office messengered it over with a brief note congratulating him on the conclusion of proceedings and wishing him well in his future endeavors. The document itself was anticlimactic, 23 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple truth. The marriage was over, the assets remained separate, and 2 people who'd promised forever had legally agreed to part ways. Caleb signed his copy at the kitchen counter, his signature flowing across the designated line with a steadiness that surprised him. He'd expected to feel something profound in this moment, relief, sadness, anger, triumph, but instead he felt only a quiet sense of closure, like finishing a book he'd been reading for too long. He scanned the signed pages and emailed them back to Jennifer, then set the physical copies in a folder marked legal documents and filed them away in the small cabinet he'd purchased for his home office. The folder sat between insurance policies and tax returns. Just another piece of administrative business in a life that was increasingly his own. His phone rang before he could return to the security protocol he'd been working on. David Chen's name flashed on the screen. "It's done?" David asked without preamble. "Just signed the final papers." "How do you feel?" "Honestly, I feel ready to work. We've got that presentation to the healthcare consortium next week, and I want to make sure the demo is flawless." David laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Only you would finalize a divorce and immediately want to talk about work. But actually, that's why I'm calling. Rebecca and I want to discuss something with you. Can you come by the office this afternoon?" "What's this about?" "Better discussed in person. Say 3 o'clock?" "I'll be there." TechShield Solutions occupied the 4th floor of a renovated building in the Pearl District, a space they'd leased 6 months ago when it became clear that working out of coffee shops and home offices was no longer practical for a growing company. The office was modest but professional. An open floor plan with workstations for the small team they'd hired, a conference room with a wall-mounted screen for client presentations, and a kitchen area that always smelled faintly of the expensive coffee Rebecca insisted on buying. Caleb arrived at 3 to find David and Rebecca already waiting in the conference room, a presentation queued up on the screen and expressions on their faces that suggested this was going to be more than a routine business discussion. "That's either very good news or very bad news," Caleb observed, taking a seat across from them. "Very good," Rebecca assured him. She was in her early 40s, a former NSA analyst who'd left government work to pursue private sector opportunities, and one of the sharpest strategic minds Caleb had ever encountered. "But it's going to require some difficult decisions, which is why we wanted to talk before moving forward." David pulled up the first slide. "We've been approached by Sentinel Corp. They're interested in acquiring TechShield." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "Acquiring us?" "The whole company." "The whole company," David confirmed. They've been watching our growth, particularly the healthcare sector contracts we've been landing. They want our encryption technology, our client relationships, and our team. They're offering $35 million for full acquisition. The number hung in the air like something physical. $35 million. Split three ways based on their equity shares. That would mean roughly $12 million for Caleb, with David and Rebecca each receiving slightly less based on the capital contributions they'd made over the years. That's a substantial offer, Caleb managed. It's a life-changing offer, Rebecca said, but it also means giving up the company we've built. No more TechShield solutions. We'd be absorbed into Sentinel, probably kept on for a transition period, then who knows what happens to our technology or our vision for it. They've guaranteed employment contracts for all of us for at least 3 years, David added. Competitive salaries, benefits, some input on how our technology gets integrated into their existing security suite. But make no mistake, we'd be employees, not owners. They'd own everything we've created. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. 6 months ago, this decision would have been complicated by Evelyn, by the divorce, by questions about timing and optics, and whether selling now would somehow validate her claims that he'd been hiding wealth. But the divorce was final, the truth was on record, and the only person he needed to consider was himself. "What do you two want to do?" he asked, still facing the window. "Honestly? We're torn," Rebecca admitted. "Part of me wants to keep building, keep growing, see how big we can make this thing on our own. But another part recognizes that $35 million is the kind of exit most tech founders only dream about. We could take that money and start something new, or invest it, or just enjoy the security it provides." "David?" "I'm leaning towards selling," David said quietly. "My wife and I have been talking about starting a family. This kind of money would mean I could take time off, be present for my kids in ways my own dad never was. But I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for, Caleb. This company wouldn't exist without your technology. If you want to hold out, build this thing into something even bigger, Rebecca and I will support that." Caleb turned back to face them. "When do they need an answer?" 2 weeks. They're giving us time to review their offer, consult with attorneys, make sure we understand all the implications. And if we say no?" Rebecca pulled up another slide showing TechShield's projected growth trajectory. "If we say no, we keep growing at our current pace. Based on our contracts pipeline and market trends, we could be looking at revenues of 15 to 20 million annually within 3 years. Maybe more if we expand internationally like we've discussed. But that's projections, not guarantees. And it would mean continuing to work 80-hour weeks, continuing to shoulder all the risk and stress of building a company from the ground up. Whereas selling gives us guaranteed liquidity now, and someone else takes on the risk and stress," Caleb finished. "Exactly." He returned to his seat, thinking about the question that had been implicit in Maya's advice months ago, in Jennifer's steady guidance through the divorce, in his own decision to finally stand up for himself against Evelyn's narrative. What did he actually want? Not what he should want, not what looked impressive or proved a point, but what would actually make him happy. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "But I'm not opposed to selling. I built TechShield because I wanted to create something meaningful, and we've done that. We've proven the technology works, built a client base that trusts us, created something valuable. If selling lets us do that on an even bigger scale while giving us financial security and time to pursue other interests, that's not failure. That's success." David's shoulders relaxed visibly. "I was afraid you'd see selling as giving up. 6 months ago I might have. But I've spent too much time lately learning the difference between stubbornness and strength, knowing when to hold on and when to let go. This feels like a let go moment." "So, we're seriously considering this?" Rebecca asked. "We're seriously considering it. Let's review their offer in detail, get our attorneys involved, make sure the terms are actually as good as they sound. But yeah, I'm open to this." Over the next 2 weeks, they dissected every aspect of Sentinel's offer with the help of attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors. The terms were indeed as strong as they'd initially appeared. Fair valuation, reasonable employment contracts, provisions that protected their existing clients and ensured the technology would be used responsibly. There were negotiations around specific clauses, Some back and forth about transition timelines and equity vesting, but nothing that fundamentally changed the attractiveness of the deal. Caleb found himself talking through the decision with Maya over dinner one evening at her favorite Thai restaurant, the same one she'd brought food from on the night he'd been ready to isolate himself completely. $12 million, Maya said, shaking her head in wonder. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? 6 months ago, Evelyn was telling everyone you were broke and directionless. 6 months ago, I was letting her tell everyone that, Caleb corrected. Big difference. True. So what are you going to do with $12 million? Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. Put most of it in investments, I guess. Maybe buy a house eventually, though I actually like my apartment. Take a real vacation for the first time in years. That's it? No sports car, no yacht, no ridiculous displays of wealth to prove Evelyn wrong about you? Caleb smiled. I already proved Evelyn wrong. I don't need a sports car to make the point again. Maya studied him across the table, her expression shifting to something more serious. You've changed, since the divorce. You're more, I don't know, present. Like you're actually inhabiting your own life instead of just observing it. That's a good way to put it. I think I spent so many years trying not to take up too much space, trying not to be inconvenient or demanding or difficult. With Evelyn, with work, with everything. And at some point that stops being consideration for others and becomes just erasure of yourself. And now? Now I'm learning that taking up space isn't the same as being selfish, that having boundaries isn't the same as being cold, that protecting what I've built isn't the same as being greedy. He paused, picking at his pad thai. Evelyn taught me a lot, actually, just not the lessons she thought she was teaching. Such as? Such as the importance of being seen for who you actually are, not who someone needs you to be. The value of speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. The difference between peace and just avoiding conflict. He met Maya's eyes. I don't regret the marriage, even knowing how it ended. I needed to learn those things, and apparently this was how I needed to learn them. Maya reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you for how you handled all of this, for standing up for yourself, for not letting her take pieces of you with her when she left. Thanks, that means a lot. They finished dinner talking about Maya's work, their mother's upcoming visit, plans for the holidays that were approaching faster than either of them had realized. Normal sibling conversation, the kind they'd always had, except now without the undercurrent of concern that had colored Maya's words for years whenever they discussed Caleb's marriage. 3 days later, Caleb, David, and Rebecca sat in a conference room at Sentinel's downtown headquarters and signed the acquisition agreement. The Sentinel CEO, an energetic woman named Patricia Wu, congratulated them on building something worth buying and assured them their technology would be in good hands. We're not just acquiring a product, Patricia said as they shook hands after the signing. We're acquiring a philosophy about security and encryption that aligns perfectly with where we want to take Sentinel. Your work is going to make a real difference to our clients. That's what we built it for, Caleb replied. Not for the acquisition, but to make a difference. If you can take it further than we could have on our own, that's exactly what should happen. The money hit his account 2 weeks later after all the escrow and legal requirements were satisfied. Caleb checked his balance one morning and saw a number that was simultaneously thrilling and surreal. He was, by any reasonable definition, wealthy. Not just comfortable, not just successful, but genuinely, independently wealthy in a way that would fundamentally change what was possible in his life. He celebrated by ordering pizza and working on a consulting project he'd agreed to take on for one of TechShield's former clients. The pizza was good, the work was satisfying, and the number in his bank account didn't change who he was or what brought him satisfaction. A month after the acquisition finalized, Caleb received an unexpected email from Thomas Grant, Evelyn's father. They'd exchanged brief pleasantries at a charity event a few weeks earlier, awkward but civil, but hadn't had any substantial communication since the divorce. The email was longer than their previous exchange and more personal. Caleb, I hope this message finds you well. I heard about the TechShield acquisition. Congratulations. That's a remarkable achievement and a testament to the vision and skill you brought to building that company. I'm reaching out because I owe you a more substantial apology than the brief one I sent months ago. I enabled Evelyn's behavior during your marriage by reinforcing the narrative she'd constructed. When she'd complain about you not being ambitious enough or make dismissive comments about your work, I didn't push back. I should have. I've spent my career investing in businesses and evaluating talent, and I failed to see what you were building because I was looking through my daughter's lens instead of using my own judgment. That was wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry. I hope we can maintain some connection despite the divorce. You're a person of integrity and capability, and those qualities are rare enough that they should be valued regardless of family complications. Thomas. Caleb read the email twice, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Thomas's apology mattered. It represented a kind of acknowledgement from Evelyn's inner circle that she'd been wrong in her assessment of him. But it also highlighted how thoroughly Evelyn had controlled the narrative around their marriage, shaping even her father's perception of who Caleb was and what he was capable of. He replied with genuine appreciation. Thomas, thank you for reaching out and for your honesty. Your apology means a great deal to me. I don't hold any resentment toward you or anyone in Evelyn's family. We all see what we expect to see, especially when it comes from people we love and trust. I'd be happy to maintain a connection. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime when you're free. Caleb. Thomas responded within the hour, suggesting a date, and 2 weeks later they sat in a downtown coffee shop having what turned out to be a remarkably honest conversation about marriage, perception, and the ways successful people sometimes fail to see past their own assumptions. Evelyn's struggling, Thomas admitted over his second espresso. Not financially. She's still doing well in her career, but personally, she's questioning a lot of the beliefs she built her identity around. That's probably healthy, Caleb said. Painful, but healthy. She asked me not to tell you this, but I think you should know anyway. She's in therapy, real therapy, not just talking to friends who tell her what she wants to hear. She's actually working on understanding why she needed you to be unsuccessful, why she constructed the dynamics in your marriage the way she did. Good for her. I mean that sincerely. She also asked me to tell you, if I happen to talk to you, that she's sorry. Again, more deeply than she was able to articulate in court. She knows that apology doesn't change anything, but she wanted you to know. Caleb nodded slowly, processing this information. Tell her I appreciate that. And tell her that I hope therapy helps her build better relationships in the future. Ones based on actual partnership instead of power dynamics. I will. Thomas paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to say something more. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you regret marrying her? Knowing how it ended, would you do it differently if you could go back? It was a question Caleb had asked himself many times over the past months. No, I don't regret it. The marriage taught me things I needed to learn about myself, about relationships, about the importance of being honest even when it's uncomfortable. I wish it had ended differently, with less pain and public drama. But the experience itself? That shaped who I am now, and I like who I am now better than who I was before. That's a remarkably mature perspective. It's a hard-won perspective, Caleb corrected with a slight smile. There were definitely moments during the divorce where I was much less philosophical about the whole thing. They talked for another hour about business, about Portland's evolving tech scene, about Thomas's plans for retirement, and Caleb's plans for what came next after the acquisition. It was the kind of conversation they should have been able to have during the marriage, but never could because of all the unstated assumptions and power dynamics that had poisoned those years. As they were parting ways outside the coffee shop, Thomas said something that stuck with Caleb long after they'd gone their separate directions. You know what I admire most about how you handled this whole situation? You never tried to destroy Evelyn, even when you had every reason to. Even when she was actively trying to damage your reputation, you focused on telling your truth without tearing her down. That takes real strength. Tearing her down would have made me into someone I didn't want to be, Caleb said. I was fighting for my dignity, not for revenge. There's a difference. There is. And not everyone recognizes that difference. Winter settled over Portland with its characteristic gray skies and persistent drizzle. Caleb transitioned into his role at Sentinel, finding the work engaging but less personally fulfilling than building TechShield had been. He was contributing to good projects with talented people, but there was something missing, the sense of ownership, of building something from nothing, of every decision directly shaping the outcome. He lasted 4 months before admitting to himself that he wasn't meant to be an employee, even a well-compensated one with significant autonomy. The acquisition had been the right decision financially and strategically, but it had also revealed something important about what actually motivated him. He didn't want to work on someone else's vision, no matter how aligned it might be with his own values. He gave his notice to Patricia Wu over lunch, expecting her to be disappointed or frustrated. Instead, she laughed. "I wondered how long you'd last," she admitted. "You're a builder, Caleb. Builders don't usually thrive in corporate environments, even good ones. What's next for you?" "Honestly, I don't know yet. I've got some consulting clients who've been asking for more dedicated attention. Maybe I build something new, smaller this time, more focused on what I actually enjoy doing versus what's most profitable." "Well, when you figure it out, stay in touch. Sentinel would be happy to partner with whatever you build next, assuming it's not a direct competitor." He left Sentinel on good terms with a healthy bank account and complete freedom to pursue whatever interested him. The safety net of financial security meant he could take risks he'd never been able to take before, build things without worrying about immediate profitability, work with clients and on projects that aligned with his values rather than just his financial needs. Spring brought unexpected clarity. Caleb started taking on consulting projects with a very specific focus, helping small nonprofits and community organizations improve their cybersecurity without the massive costs typically associated with enterprise-level protection. It was challenging work that paid significantly less than his corporate clients, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways his previous work had never been. He was helping people who genuinely needed help, using his expertise to protect organizations doing important work in areas like housing assistance, healthcare access, and education equity. The gratitude he received from these clients felt different than the transactional appreciation from Fortune 500 companies. It felt personal, meaningful, like his work was actually making the world slightly better in tangible ways. Maya noticed the shift during one of their regular dinners. "You seem happier, lighter, like you're not carrying around weight you don't need anymore." "I think I finally figured out what I want to do with all this money and expertise I've accumulated," Caleb said. "I want to use it to help people who actually need help. Not just make rich companies slightly more secure, but give smaller organizations access to the same level of protection they could never afford otherwise." "That's beautiful. Also very much not the path most tech millionaires take." "I'm not most tech millionaires. I didn't get into this field to get rich. That was just a side effect of being good at what I do. I got into it because I like solving problems and building systems that protect people. Turns out I can do that more effectively now than I ever could before." "Evelyn would have told you that was a waste of your potential," Maya observed. "Evelyn measured potential in terms of profit margins and industry recognition. I'm measuring it in terms of whether I'm using my skills to do something meaningful. Different metrics entirely." A year after the divorce was finalized, Caleb received one final communication from Evelyn. Not through attorneys this time, just a simple email sent late on a Thursday evening. "Caleb, I don't expect a response to this, but I wanted to reach out. I've been doing a lot of work in therapy on understanding the patterns that led to our marriage failing. My therapist suggested I write you a letter, not to send, just to process my thoughts. But I think you deserve to actually read it, so here goes. I spent our entire marriage trying to be the successful one, the strong one, the one who had everything figured out. I needed that role because I was terrified of being vulnerable, of needing help, of admitting I didn't have all the answers. You threatened that because you were competent and capable and didn't actually need me in the ways I needed to be needed. So I constructed a narrative where you were the struggling one and I was the savior, and I clung to that narrative even when it stopped matching reality. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I see now what I did. I see how I diminished you, how I made our marriage about my need for validation instead of about actual partnership. I see how my fear of not being enough made me treat you like you weren't enough. You deserved better. You deserved a partner who celebrated your success instead of being threatened by it. I'm working on becoming the kind of person who could be that partner for someone someday. I hope you found or will find someone who sees you for who you actually are and values that. You're remarkable, Caleb. You always were. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy protecting myself from feeling inadequate. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. You deserve both. Evelyn. Caleb read the email 3 times, feeling emotions he couldn't quite name shift through him. There was vindication. Evelyn finally understood and acknowledged what she'd done. There was sadness, for the years they'd wasted, for the pain they'd caused each other, for the marriage that might have been possible if they'd both been different people. And there was, surprisingly, a kind of peace, the knowledge that Evelyn was actually working on herself, actually growing, actually taking responsibility for her part in their failure. He replied simply, "Evelyn, thank you for your honesty. I'm glad you're doing the work to understand yourself better. For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're looking for too. We both deserve to be happy, just not with each other. Take care. Caleb." He hit send and closed his laptop, walking to the window of his apartment to look out at the Portland evening. The city lights were beginning to come on, creating patterns of illumination against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was probably reading his response, maybe finding her own sense of closure, or maybe just continuing her therapy journey. Somewhere else, David and Rebecca were building new lives with the security the acquisition had provided. Somewhere, his mother and Maya were living their own stories, connected to his, but ultimately separate. And here, in this small apartment that was entirely his own, Caleb Brooks stood in the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. He was 45 years old, financially secure, professionally respected, and finally, completely free to build whatever came next on his own terms. The divorce had been painful, the public exposure uncomfortable, the legal battles exhausting, but it had also been necessary, a crucible that burned away the pretense and revealed what was real underneath. He'd learned that silence wasn't always weakness, that speaking up wasn't always aggression, that protecting what he'd built wasn't greed but self-respect. He'd learned that other people's perception of him mattered less than his own understanding of who he was, that success measured by someone else's standards would never feel like success at all, that the quietest voices sometimes carried the most truth, if anyone bothered to listen. Most importantly, he'd learned that dignity didn't require loudness, that vindication didn't require revenge, that winning didn't mean destroying the other person. It just meant standing firm in your own truth and letting that truth speak for itself. Evelyn had spent 7 years trying to convince him, and everyone else, that he was nothing without her status, her money, her world. She'd been wrong. But more than that, he'd been wrong too. Wrong to accept her narrative for so long, wrong to shrink himself to fit her needs, wrong to believe that keeping the peace was worth losing himself. He wasn't nothing. He never had been. He was exactly who he'd always been, a quiet man who built meaningful things, who valued substance over appearance, who measured success by different metrics than profit margins and social status. Evelyn's inability to see that didn't diminish its truth. It just meant she'd spent 7 years looking at someone and seeing only her own reflection, her own fears, her own need to feel superior. The man she'd underestimated had proven himself without ever raising his voice, without dramatic gestures or public confrontations, simply by existing authentically and letting the evidence speak for itself. Sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet certainty of knowing your own worth, regardless of who chose to acknowledge it. Caleb smiled slightly, his reflection ghosting back at him from the darkening window. Tomorrow he'd start work on a new security system for a homeless services organization. Next week, he'd meet with a community health clinic about protecting their patient data. Next month, he'd probably take on another project that paid less than it should, but mattered more than money could measure. And through it all, he'd be exactly who he'd always been, just visible now, recognized now, free now to build his life on foundations of truth instead of silence. The quiet millionaire, the underestimated husband, the man who proved that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to be less than you are, no matter how convenient that might be for someone else. Evelyn had wanted him to sign away his dignity along with their marriage. Instead, he'd signed away only the illusion that they'd ever really known each other at all. And in doing so, he'd reclaimed something far more valuable than any amount of money or property or public vindication. He'd reclaimed himself. And that, in the end, was the only victory that had ever really mattered.